Welcome to the Crypto 101 show, where we dive into the world of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, blockchain, and all the technology with it. Whether you're experienced or a beginner to crypto, our goal is to break down complex concepts and make it easy for you to understand the basics. From Bitcoin to altcoins, we'll cover it all in a way that's easy to digest and provide listeners with the knowledge and understanding they need to make informed decisions and better critical thought. Sit back, relax, and let's simplify your understanding of cryptocurrencies on the Crypto 101 show. The Bitcoin Series Part 16. What if the US adopted Bitcoin as a reserve? I need to start off by saying this is not financial advice, so if you are looking for that, the show isn't for you. The content of this podcast episode is for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed here are not meant to be taken as financial, investment, or any other advice. What if the US added Bitcoin to its reserves? Not as a gimmick, not as a hedge, but as a real strategic asset like gold or foreign currencies. It sounds extreme, but is it really? Would it strengthen the dollar or weaken it? Would it restore trust or unleash chaos? In this episode, we're asking what a Bitcoin-backed US reserve might actually look like, what it would change, what it would cost, and whether a shift like this could ever happen without tearing something else apart. So let's jump in. Question 1. What does it even mean for Bitcoin to be a reserve currency? Let's start with the basics. When people say Bitcoin could become a reserve currency, what do they actually mean? Because it sounds huge, like a tectonic shift in the financial order. But the reality could take many forms, some subtle, some seismic. With rising national debts, concern about inflation, and the increasing mainstream adoption of cryptocurrencies, the idea of Bitcoin as a reserve asset is no longer just a fringe discussion, but a serious consideration for some. So here's the question. Would the US back the dollar with Bitcoin, or would it just hold Bitcoin, the way it holds gold or foreign currencies as part of its strategic reserves? Let's break that down. Scenario 1. Bitcoin-backed dollar. This would be a hard break from the current system. The US could, in theory, peg the dollar to Bitcoin. Say 1 Bitcoin equals X amount of dollars. And the government guarantees convertibility. That's a full-blown Bitcoin standard, similar to the gold standard of the past. It would radically limit money printing. No more Federal Reserve flipping levers and flooding the market with liquidity. The dollar would become a digital proxy for something the government can't create out of thin air. Sounds like a Bitcoin maximalist dream, but it would be a policymaker's nightmare. Why? Because it would strip the US of its monetary sovereignty. Monetary sovereignty allows a government to independently manage its economy, control inflation, and stimulate growth during downturns through tools like interest rates, adjustments, and quantitative easing. Giving that up means ceding crucial control over the nation's economic destiny. It couldn't inflate away debt, it couldn't stimulate in a crisis, and it would tie the dollar's fate to a volatile, decentralized asset the government doesn't control. Scenario 2. Bitcoin as a strategic reserve. More likely, the US quietly adds Bitcoin to its balance sheet, alongside gold, yen, euros, and other reserve assets. This could involve direct purchases on exchanges or over-the-counter deals. It doesn't replace the dollar. It doesn't peg the currency. It just hedges the system. A bet on the future, a backup plan if the current model cracks. This wouldn't require public approval, massive legislation, or a total system reboot. It could be done behind closed doors, and it might already be on the radar. In this scenario, Bitcoin becomes a neutral asset, not money for the people, not the base layer of a new financial order, just a tool, a chip on the table in the geopolitical game. This neutrality is precisely what makes it appealing to some nations looking to diversify away from traditional fiat currencies, but it also means it's outside the direct influence of any single government, including the US. That's not as revolutionary, but it might be how a revolution begins. So, what does it mean for Bitcoin to be a reserve currency? It depends on the path. Backed reserves would change everything: how we spend, how we borrow, how we govern. Held reserves would change nothing immediately, but could quietly rewrite global strategy over time. Either way, it's a signal that the old system is fragile, the new tools are on the table, and that even the most powerful government on earth might someday need something it can't print. Question 2. Could the US use Bitcoin without giving up control, especially with interest rates, inflation, and the Federal Reserve? Let's say the US does it. It adds Bitcoin to the reserve stack, maybe even backs the dollar with it. Could it do that without giving up control? Could the government still manage inflation, still guide the economy? Could the Federal Reserve still pull the levers? Let's break that down. The current model is structured with control through flexibility. Right now, the US dollar is backed by nothing but trust, and that's by design. It gives the Federal Reserve near total freedom to respond to crises, manipulate interest rates, and print money when needed. It's not always wise, it's not always fair, but it's extremely powerful. The US controls the dollar, and the dollar controls the world. Enter Bitcoin, and the problem of hard limits and Bitcoin flips that model upside down. There's no central control, there's no printing, and there's no emergency override. If the US adopts Bitcoin in a meaningful way, especially as backing for the dollar, it's locking itself into a system it doesn't control. That means no more printing to cover deficits, no more fine-tuning interest rates with monetary policy, no more inflation as policy tool. That's not just losing control. That's surrendering the very thing that gives the US its economic dominance. But what happens to the Fed? Being blunt, if Bitcoin becomes the foundation of US money, the Federal Reserve becomes obsolete, at least in its current form. No need for quantitative easing, no need for overnight repo operations or rate hikes to cool the economy, no closed door meetings to decide the price of borrowing money. Bitcoin doesn't negotiate. Its monetary policy is already set forever. That doesn't mean the Fed disappears overnight. It could adapt, morph into a fiscal or regulatory body, but the idea of managing the economy through money supply, that's gone. Could the US still influence the economy? Yes, but only through fiscal policy, taxes, spending, investment, but that's slower, messier, and it requires actual legislation. Bitcoin doesn't allow quick fixes, and that's exactly the point. For Bitcoiners, that's the dream. No more last minute bailouts, no more endless debt, no more kicking the can. But for a government addicted to control, it's a nightmare. So could the US adopt Bitcoin without giving up control? Not really. It's like trying to ride a wild horse and still believe you're holding the reins. Bitcoin doesn't bend, and that's the trade off. You can't embrace hard money and keep the soft power. Question 3. Would a Bitcoin reserve benefit or hurt the US? So let's say the US makes the move. It adopts Bitcoin as part of its reserve system, maybe even backs the dollar with it. The question now becomes, does that make America stronger or weaker? Does it restore trust in the currency? Or does it strip away the tools we've relied on to manage crises for the last 100 years? Let's first go over potential benefits with trust, discipline, and global credibility. Supporters will say this is exactly what the US needs. Bitcoin would impose discipline on spending, on debt, on reckless monetary policy. It would restore trust, not just with citizens, but with foreign governments and global markets. No more backroom money printing, no more inflation eating away at savings and wages. Just hard money, transparent, predictable, and immune to manipulation. In a world of currency wars and central bank games, the US would be signaling, we don't play like that anymore. That could potentially elevate the dollar's credibility, not weaken it. It could attract global investments. It could force the government to govern within its means. That's the Bitcoin argument. Less control, more trust. Let's look at the case for harm now with fragility in the face of crisis with the other side. A Bitcoin reserve strips the US of its financial flexibility, and that's not just about power, it's about response. What happens when the next crisis hits? What happens when unemployment spikes? When a bank run begins? When a war breaks out? Right now, the Fed can inject liquidity, lower rates, expand credit. It can buy time, even if it comes at a long-term cost. With Bitcoin in the foundation, those levers vanish. The system becomes rigid, unforgiving, cold. That's good in theory, but it's brutal in practice if you need help now. Could it trigger a crisis of its own? There's also a risk that adopting Bitcoin too fast or signaling a loss of confidence in the current system could backfire. Markets could panic, debts could become unpayable. Foreign allies might see it not as strength, but as desperation. It's not just about what you do, it's about when and how fast. So, would it help or hurt? That depends on your definition of strength. If you believe true strength is discipline, transparency, and long-term trust, then yes, Bitcoin could be a powerful asset to anchor the system. But if you believe strength is flexibility, speed, and the ability to act in the moment, then it's a liability. Because Bitcoin doesn't give second chances. It doesn't print. It doesn't bend. It just is. And that's both its brilliance and its burden. Bitcoin as a reserve currency isn't just a technical shift. It's a transformation in philosophy. It asks the US to give up control in exchange for trust, to anchor its future in something it can't manipulate. Maybe that's scary. Maybe it's exactly what we need. Until the next episode, stay curious, stay grounded. I want to be extremely upfront that I try my best to leave all of my opinions out of this. I know this is very condensed and simplified, but I want you to gain your own understanding and beliefs and not be persuaded by me. I hope this helped you gain a better grasp of it. Please remember to share, follow, and subscribe to our mailing list and to your favorite podcast app for future episodes so you can gain more with your crypto knowledge. If this sparked something in you or made you question what's possible, I'd love to hear it. And if you found this valuable, share it, tag someone who needs to hear it, or just sit with it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Crypto 101 Show. If you would like to join our email list, email us at thecrypto101show@gmail.com. For more helpful tips, subscribe in your favorite podcast app and leave a review so that you don't miss our next episode. See you next time.